Blood stained the hem of Fiona Emerson's black mourning dress as she stumbled through the door of the general store in Pecos, Texas. Her trembling hands pressed against her side where crimson seeped through the fabric. The shopkeeper's wife gasped and rushed forward, but Fiona held up one shaking hand to steady herself against the counter, her voice barely above a whisper as she said the words that would change everything. "Please, I need ointment and gauze." The year was 1878, and Fiona had been a widow for exactly 3 months. Her husband Thomas had died in a logging accident up north, and she had traveled to Pecos seeking a fresh start, hoping the dry Texas heat would somehow burn away the grief that clung to her like morning fog. She had purchased a small homestead on the outskirts of town with the little money Thomas had left her, determined to prove she could survive on her own. But survival had proven more difficult than she imagined. The wound in her side was from a rusty nail that had torn through her dress when she had tried to repair the sagging fence around her property that morning. She had thought nothing of it at first, just another scratch in a life that had become full of them. But by afternoon, the wound had started to throb and bleed more heavily than seemed natural. Now, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and pink, Fiona realized she might have made a terrible mistake in trying to handle everything alone. "Dear Lord, child, sit down before you fall down, Mrs. Henderson said, her plump hands guiding Fiona toward a chair near the potbelly stove. "Henry, go fetch Doc Morrison." "No," Fiona protested weakly. "I cannot afford the doctor. Please, just the ointment and gauze. I can tend to it myself." The bell above the door chimed as someone else entered the store. Fiona did not look up, too focused on keeping the black spots dancing at the edges of her vision from overtaking her completely. She heard boot heels against the wooden floor, steady and unhurried, and then a man's voice, deep and concerned. "Mrs. Henderson, what happened?" "Oh, Blake, thank goodness. This young woman is hurt and being stubborn about seeing the doctor." Fiona forced herself to look up then, and found herself staring into the bluest eyes she had ever seen. The man standing before her was tall, with sun-weathered skin and sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck beneath his worn hat. He could not have been more than 28 or 30, with the kind of capable hands that suggested a life spent working outdoors. There was something gentle in his expression, despite the hardness that the frontier carved into every man who called it home. "Madam," he said, crouching down so they were at eye level, "my name is Blake Calloway. I am no doctor, but I have tended enough wounds on the trail to know infected iron can kill you just as surely as a bullet. Will you let me help?" Fiona wanted to refuse. She had promised herself that she would never rely on another person again, that she would never give anyone the power to leave her devastated the way Thomas's death had left her. But the room was spinning now, and Blake Calloway's steady gaze held something she had not seen in a long time. Genuine concern with no expectation of anything in return. "I do not have money to pay you," she whispered. "I did not ask for any." He stood and turned to Mrs. Henderson. "Get me that ointment and gauze, some clean water and whiskey if you have it. Put it on my account." "Blake, you cannot keep doing this," Mrs. Henderson protested even as she hurried to gather the supplies. "You barely make enough to feed yourself and that horse of yours." "Then I will make do with a little less. The lady needs help." 10 minutes later, Fiona found herself in the back room of the general store, sitting on a wooden crate while Blake carefully cleaned the wound in her side. He had asked permission before helping her remove the outer layer of her dress, his manner entirely professional and respectful. He worked with a quiet efficiency that spoke of experience, his touch surprisingly gentle for hands so calloused and strong. "This is going to sting," he warned before applying the ointment. Fiona bit her lip and nodded, determined not to cry out. The burn of the medicine was fierce, but it was nothing compared to the pain of the past 3 months. "You are tougher than you look." "I've had practice," Fiona said quietly. Blake began wrapping the gauze around her midsection, his movements careful and sure. "Mrs. Henderson mentioned you are new to Pecos. Where are you from?" "Pennsylvania originally. My husband and I moved to Arkansas for his work. After he died, I needed to go somewhere that held no memories." Fiona paused, surprised at herself for sharing so much. "I purchased the old Hartley place east of town." Blake's hands stilled for a moment. "The Hartley place? Madam, that property has been abandoned for near about 5 years. The house is barely standing. I noticed, but it was all I could afford." Fiona tried to keep the defensiveness from her voice. "I am managing to hurt yourself on rusty nails, it seems." The words could have been harsh, but his tone was kind. He finished tying off the gauze and stepped back. "That should hold, but you need to keep it clean and change the dressing twice a day. If you see red streaks spreading from the wound or develop a fever, you need to see Doc Morrison, money or not. Promise me." Fiona met his eyes again and saw that he meant it. This stranger genuinely cared whether she lived or died, and the realization made her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "I promise." "Good." Blake helped her to her feet with a steadying hand at her elbow. "Do you have a way home?" "I walked into town. In your condition." "That is 3 miles." He shook his head. "I will take you. My horse can carry double." Fiona knew she should refuse. She knew that accepting more help from this man was dangerous, not because he seemed like a threat, but because his kindness was already starting to chip away at the walls she had built around her heart. But the sun was setting, and the thought of walking 3 miles while her side throbbed was overwhelming. "Thank you," she said simply. Blake collected her packages from the front of the store, insisting on paying for the ointment and gauze despite her protests. Mrs. Henderson watched them leave with a knowing look that made Fiona's cheeks burn. Outside, a beautiful chestnut mare waited patiently at the hitching post. "This is Copper," Blake said, patting the horse's neck affectionately. "She is gentle as a lamb. Do not let her size fool you." He mounted first, then reached down to help Fiona up behind him. She hesitated only a moment before taking his hand, gasping slightly at the strength with which he pulled her up. She had to wrap her arms around his waist to keep her balance, and she was acutely aware of the solid warmth of him, the way he smelled of leather and sage and something indefinably masculine. "Hold on," Blake said, and urged Copper into an easy walk through town. Pecos was small, just a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street, but it was growing. Fiona had learned that the railroad was coming through in the next year or two, which meant opportunity for those brave enough to stake their claim. As they rode east out of town, the landscape opened up into rolling plains dotted with mesquite and scrub brush. The sky was enormous here, bigger than any sky Fiona had known back east, and the sunset painted it in colors that seemed too vivid to be real. "It is beautiful," she said without thinking. "That it is," Blake agreed. "Hard country but beautiful. You have to respect it, though. It will kill you if you are not careful." "Everything kills you eventually." Blake was quiet for a moment. "That sounds like someone who has seen too much loss." "My husband, 3 months ago." The words came easier now, perhaps because she could not see his face, perhaps because the steady rhythm of the horse's gait was oddly soothing. "He was 26. A tree fell wrong during a logging operation. They said he died instantly, but I will never know if that is true or if they just told me that to make it easier." "I am sorry." Simple words, but Blake said them with a weight that suggested he understood loss himself. "Are you married, Mr. Calloway?" "No, madam." Came close once, but she decided ranch life was not for her. Married a banker in San Antonio instead. There was no bitterness in his voice, just acceptance. "I have a small spread about 10 miles north of your place. Cattle mostly, a few horses. It is not much, but it is mine." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Fiona found herself relaxing against Blake's back despite her determination to keep her distance. There was something inherently trustworthy about him, something solid and real that made her want to believe that not every man would leave her shattered. The Hartley place appeared on the horizon as the last light faded from the sky. Even in the gathering darkness, it was clear the property had seen better days. The house sagged to one side, several windows were broken, and the barn looked like a strong wind might knock it over. But there was a well that still worked and 20 acres of land that could be something with enough effort. Blake helped her down from the horse, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary to ensure she was steady. "You are really planning to live here alone?" "I do not have much choice." Fiona straightened her shoulders, trying to project a confidence she did not feel. "I will make it work." "What do you know about ranching, farming, surviving in country like this?" "Not much," she admitted, "but I am a fast learner." Blake was quiet, studying her face in the dim light. Then he seemed to come to some kind of decision. "I will come by tomorrow morning. There is work that needs doing here before winter comes, and you cannot manage it all alone, especially not with that wound healing. I cannot pay you." "I am starting to think you do not listen very well, Mrs. Emerson." There was amusement in his voice now. "I am not asking for payment. I am offering help because it is the right thing to do. Will you accept it?" Fiona wanted to say no. She wanted to prove that she could survive on her own, that she did not need anyone. But she was also practical enough to know that pride was a luxury she could not afford. "Yes, thank you." "Good. Now let me check inside and make sure you do not have any unwelcome visitors before I leave you." He did just that, lighting a lantern he found inside and checking every corner of the small house. It was sparse inside a single room with a fireplace, a rough table and chairs, a narrow bed in one corner, and not much else. But it was clean, and Fiona had already begun to make it feel like hers with the few possessions she had brought from Arkansas. "Lock the door after I leave," Blake instructed. "And if you need anything before morning, fire 3 shots in the air. I will hear them and come." "I do not have a gun." Blake's expression suggested this did not surprise him. He removed the pistol from his belt and placed it on the table. "It is loaded, 6 shots. Do not use it unless you have to, but do not hesitate if you need to. Can you shoot? Thomas taught me the basics." "Good enough." Blake moved toward the door, then paused. "Get some rest, Mrs. Emerson. Things will look better in the morning." "Fiona," she said impulsively. "You can call me Fiona." He smiled then, a slow, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "Fiona, I am Blake. I will see you tomorrow." After he left, Fiona locked the door and sank onto the bed, suddenly exhausted. Her side ached, but the pain was manageable now. She closed her eyes and listened to the sound of Copper's hooves fading into the distance. And for the first time since Thomas died, she felt something that might have been hope. Blake arrived at dawn the next morning with a wagon full of supplies and a determination that brooked no argument. Fiona had been awake for hours, unable to sleep past first light, and she watched from the window as he unloaded lumber, nails, tools, and what looked like several days' worth of food. "You did not have to do all this," she said, stepping outside. She had changed the dressing on her wound that morning, relieved to see that it looked clean with no signs of infection. "I know," Blake said simply, "but I wanted to. How are you feeling?" "Better." "The wound looks good. Let me see." Fiona hesitated, then lifted the side of her dress enough for him to examine the bandage. His touch was clinical as he checked the gauze, but her skin still tingled where his fingers brushed against it. "Looks good. You did a fine job changing it. Now, let me teach you how to fix a fence properly so you do not impale yourself again." For the next several hours, Blake worked with a focused intensity while teaching Fiona everything he knew. He showed her how to sink fence posts deep enough to withstand the wind, how to string wire tight, how to hammer nails at an angle so they would hold. He was patient when she made mistakes, encouraging when she got frustrated, and quietly approving when she succeeded. "You are a good teacher," Fiona said as they paused for water in the late morning. "You are a good student. Most people do not listen as carefully as you do." They worked until the heat of the day became oppressive, then moved into the shade of the sagging barn. Blake examined the structure with a critical eye. "This needs more work than I can do in a day, but I can shore up the main supports and patch the roof enough to get you through winter. You will need to replace the whole thing eventually." "Eventually might be a long time coming," Fiona said wryly. "I have exactly $47 left to my name. Then we will make do with what we have." Blake pulled off his hat and wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "How did you end up here, Fiona? Really?" She sat on an overturned crate and looked out at the land that was now hers. "After Thomas died, I could not stay where we had been. Everything reminded me of him. His brother offered to let me live with his family, but I could not bear to be a burden. A woman in my boarding house mentioned that land was cheap out west, that a person could start fresh. So I took what little money the logging company gave me as compensation and came here. That took courage, or desperation. I'm not sure there is much difference." Fiona met his eyes. "What about you? Were you born in Texas, Oklahoma territory?" "My family had a ranch there, but raiders burned us out when I was 17. My parents and younger sister died in the fire. I drifted for a while after that, working cattle drives, doing odd jobs. Saved enough to buy my land about 4 years ago. It has been slow building it up, but it is something." "I am sorry about your family. It was a long time ago," but the pain in his eyes suggested otherwise. "I guess we have both known loss." "Yes." Fiona stood and brushed off her skirt, "which is why we understand that standing around talking about it does not fix fences or barns. What is next?" Blake smiled at that. "Next, I teach you how to patch a roof." Over the following weeks, Blake came to Fiona's property almost every day. He never stayed past sunset, always mindful of propriety, but the work they accomplished together was remarkable. The fence was repaired and reinforced. The barn received new supports and a patched roof. The broken windows in the house were replaced with glass Blake somehow procured. He taught her how to hunt small game, how to preserve food, how to read the sky for coming weather. But more than that, they talked. Fiona found herself sharing things she had never told anyone, her fear that she had never really loved Thomas the way a wife should, that their marriage had been more about practical necessity than passion. Her guilt over feeling relieved sometimes that she was free. Her terror that she would fail here and have to return east in defeat. Blake listened to it all without judgment. In return, he told her about his dreams of building a real ranch, about the loneliness of working land alone, about how he sometimes went days without speaking to another person. He confessed that he had given up on the idea of marriage and family, convinced that no woman would want the hard life he could offer. "I think you underestimate yourself," Fiona said one evening as they sat on her newly repaired porch watching the sunset. It had become their routine on the days he worked, late, a few minutes of peace before he rode home. "Any woman would be lucky to have a man as kind and capable as you. Kind does not keep you warm in winter. Capable does not make up for being gone on the range for days at a time. Blake's voice was quiet. Sarah, the woman I mentioned before, she said I loved the land more than I could ever love a person. Maybe she was right. Then she did not understand you at all. The words came out more vehemently than Fiona intended. The way you care for things, the way you have helped me when you owed me nothing, that is not a man incapable of love. That is a man with a huge heart who has not found someone who deserves it yet. Blake turned to look at her, his blue eyes intense in the fading light. And what about you, Fiona? Will you stay out here alone forever, or will you let yourself trust someone again? Her breath caught. They had been dancing around this thing between them for weeks now, this connection that had grown from gratitude into something deeper and more complicated. I do not know if I can. Losing Thomas nearly destroyed me. If I let myself care for someone again and lost them too. Life does not come with guarantees. We could both die tomorrow, thrown from a horse, snakebit, struck by lightning. Or we could live another 50 years. The only thing we control is whether we spend that time alone or together. Blake, I am not asking you to decide anything right now, he said quickly. I just want you to know that I care about you. More than I should, probably, given that we have only known each other a few weeks. But I cannot help it. You are the bravest, most determined woman I have ever met, and somewhere along the way, teaching you to fix fences and patch roofs, I started falling in love with you. Fiona's heart hammered in her chest. Part of her wanted to run, to protect herself from the possibility of more pain. But a larger part, the part that had been slowly coming back to life under Blake's patient care, wanted to run toward him instead. I am afraid. I know. So am I. Blake stood, preparing to leave as he always did. But fear is just proof that something matters. Think about it. I will be by tomorrow to help you winterize the chicken coop. That night, Fiona lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and feeling her carefully constructed walls crumbling. She had come to Texas to escape emotion, to build a life based on survival rather than feeling. But Blake had slipped past her defenses with his quiet competence and genuine kindness. And now, she had to decide whether to risk her heart again. The answer came to her in the darkness. It was already too late. She was already in love with him. The only question was whether she would be brave enough to admit it. The next morning, Fiona woke to the sound of hoofbeats and men's voices. She dressed quickly and went outside to find Blake facing down 3 riders in front of her house. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in his posture. "There's a problem here," she called, walking toward them. One of the riders, a heavy-set man with a cruel mouth, turned to look at her. "You the woman who bought this property?" "I am. Fiona Emerson." "I am Chet Morrison. I run the biggest spread in this county, and I have been trying to buy this land for years. The water rights here connect to my property, and I need them." "Then you should have bought it when it was available." "It is mine now." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "I am prepared to offer you a fair price, probably more than you paid. It is not for sale. Lady, you do not understand how things work out here. A woman alone cannot hold property like this. You will fail, and when you do, I will buy it anyway for a fraction of what I am offering now. Take the money and go back wherever you came from." Blake stepped forward, his hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip. "Mrs. Emerson said no. I suggest you respect that. Calloway. Should have known you would be sniffing around. What is she paying you? I will double it. I am not for sale either." Blake's voice was hard now, all the gentleness Fiona had come to know replaced by something sharp and dangerous. "Now get off her property before this gets unpleasant." Morrison's hand moved toward his own gun and Fiona's breath stopped. But one of his men leaned over and said something in his ear, and after a tense moment, Morrison relaxed. "This is not over. You cannot watch her place all the time, Calloway, and accidents happen to women living alone. They rode off, and Blake immediately turned to Fiona. "Are you all right?" "I am fine." "But Blake, was that a threat?" "Yes." His jaw was tight with anger. "Morrison is powerful around here, and he is not used to being told no. I do not trust him. What should I do?" Blake was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking. "I have an idea, but you are not going to like it." "Tell me." "Marry me." The words came out in a rush. "Not for real, not if you do not want it to be, but if you are married, you have more legal protection. Morrison cannot claim you are just a helpless woman who cannot manage property. And as your husband, I would have a legal right to be here, to help protect what is yours." Fiona stared at him. "You want to marry me to protect me from Chet Morrison?" "I want to marry you because I love you," Blake corrected. "But I know you are not ready for that. So I am offering a marriage of convenience if that is what you need. We can live in separate houses if you want. We can end it if you decide you want something else. But at least you will be safe." "That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard." Fiona felt something breaking open in her chest, something warm and terrifying and wonderful. "And you are completely wrong about one thing." "What is that?" "I am ready." She closed the distance between them, looking up into his surprised face. "I am in love with you too, Blake Calloway. I think I started falling the moment you crouched down in that general store and offered to help a stranger. I have been fighting it because I was scared, but I am tired of being scared. So yes, I will marry you. Not for convenience, not for protection, but because I want to build a life with you." Blake's expression transformed into pure joy. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. "Are you sure? I do not want you to feel pressured." "I am sure." Fiona rose on her toes and kissed him, pouring all her fear and hope and love into the contact. Blake made a sound low in his throat and wrapped his arms around her, deepening the kiss until Fiona felt dizzy with happiness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Blake rested his forehead against hers. "We should do this properly. Let me court you for a while. Let people see that this is real and not just a reaction to Morrison's threats." "How long?" "A few months. Long enough that no one can claim it is improper, short enough that I do not go crazy waiting to make you my wife." Fiona laughed, the sound surprising her. She could not remember the last time she had laughed with genuine joy. "A few months then. But Blake, you can kiss me like that any time you want. I am going to hold you to that promise." The next months were the happiest of Fiona's life. Blake courted her properly, riding over every day to help with work but always leaving before dark. On Sundays, they attended church together in Pecos, enduring the whispers and speculative looks from the townspeople. Mrs. Henderson from the general store became an unexpected ally, loudly proclaiming to anyone who would listen that Blake and Fiona were the most well-suited couple she had ever seen. True to Morrison's implied threat, Fiona did experience some trouble. Her chicken coop was vandalized one night, several of her hens killed. A section of fence was cut, allowing livestock from Morrison's ranch to wander onto her property and destroy part of her vegetable garden. Each time, Blake helped her repair the damage and filed complaints with the local sheriff, though nothing ever came of them. But the harassment only strengthened their resolve. Blake began staying over more often, sleeping in the barn to watch for intruders. Fiona found herself looking forward to their mornings together, sharing coffee and planning the day's work. She loved watching him move through her space, loved how natural it felt to have him there. They grew closer in every way that mattered. Blake taught her to ride properly, taking her on long trips across the range to see his property. Fiona was impressed by what he had built: a small but solid house, a good barn, healthy cattle grazing on decent land. She could picture a life there, could imagine children playing in the yard, growing old with Blake by her side. In November, Blake formally proposed. They were sitting by the fire in her house, her head resting on his shoulder while he read aloud from a newspaper someone had brought from San Antonio. He stopped mid-sentence and shifted so he could look at her. "Fiona, I know we have already talked about marriage, but I want to do this right." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band. "This was my mother's ring. It is the only thing I have left of her. I know it is not fancy, but it would mean everything to me if you would wear it." Tears filled Fiona's eyes. "Blake, I cannot take your mother's ring." "Why not? She would have loved you. She always said that a strong woman was worth 10 men, and you are the strongest person I know." He took her hand. "Fiona Emerson, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life loving you, protecting you, building something beautiful with you?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, absolutely yes." The ring slid onto her finger as if it had been made for her. Blake kissed her then, gentle and reverent, and Fiona felt the last of her fear dissolve. She had been given a second chance at love, and she was not going to waste it. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Pecos on a cold December morning in 1878. The ceremony was simple, attended by the few friends they had made in town. Mrs. Henderson cried through the entire service. The sheriff, a decent man named Tom Butler who had been sympathetic to Fiona's troubles with Morrison, served as Blake's witness. Fiona wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Blake had given her as a wedding gift, not the traditional white, but a soft blue that matched his eyes. Blake wore his Sunday best, his hair neatly combed, his face clean-shaven. When he said his vows, his voice was strong and sure, and Fiona felt her heart swell with love for this good man who had saved her in ways that had nothing to do with ointment and gauze. After the ceremony, there was a small celebration at the church. Someone produced a fiddle, and Blake surprised Fiona by being an excellent dancer. He swept her around the room while their friends clapped and cheered, his eyes never leaving her face. "Happy, Mrs. Calloway," he murmured. "Happier than I thought possible." As the sun set, they rode together back to Blake's ranch. They had decided to live there, as his house was larger and in better condition. They would keep Fiona's property for the water rights and use it for additional grazing. Blake had spent the past week preparing his house for her arrival, cleaning every corner and even adding curtains to the windows. That night, as her husband carried her over the threshold of their home, Fiona marveled at how far she had come. She had arrived in Texas broken and alone, asking for simple supplies to treat a physical wound. Instead, she had found a man who had healed wounds she did not even know she had, wounds of the heart and spirit, wounds that ran far deeper than any rusty nail could reach. Blake set her down gently, his hands framing her face. "I love you, Fiona. I will spend every day of the rest of my life trying to make you happy." "You already do," she whispered, and drew him down for a kiss that promised forever. The winter passed quietly. Blake taught Fiona the rhythms of ranch life, feeding cattle in the cold, checking water sources, maintaining equipment. She proved to be a natural, approaching each task with the same determination she had shown in fixing her own property. They worked side by side during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, building a partnership that was equal parts practical and passionate. Morrison left them alone for several months, but Fiona knew the reprieve would not last. Sure enough, in early March, problems started again. This time, someone tried to poison their water supply by throwing a dead animal into the well on Fiona's old property. Blake discovered it before any damage was done, but the message was clear. "He is not going to stop," Fiona said that evening, pacing their kitchen with barely controlled anger. What do we have to do? How do we make him leave us alone? I am not sure we can. Blake's expression was grim. Men like Morrison think they can do whatever they want. The law does not touch them, and decent people are too scared to stand up to them. Then maybe we need to stop being decent. Blake looked at her sharply. What do you mean? I mean that we have been reacting to his attacks instead of going on the offense. What does Morrison care about more than anything? His reputation, his standing in the community. What if we made it known what he has been doing? What if we collected evidence and took it not just to the local sheriff, but to the territorial governor? That could work, Blake said slowly. But it is also dangerous. If Morrison knows we are gathering evidence against him, he might escalate. Then we have to be smart about it. Fiona sat down across from him, her mind racing. Mrs. Henderson likes us. She hears everything that happens in town. We could start with her, see what she knows about Morrison's other dealings. I cannot imagine we are the only people he has harassed. Over the following weeks, they quietly investigated. Mrs. Henderson proved to be a valuable ally, connecting them with other ranchers and farmers who had been bullied by Morrison. A picture emerged of a man who had built his empire through intimidation and illegal land grabs. Several people were willing to provide written statements about Morrison's actions, though most were too afraid to testify publicly. Blake compiled everything into a detailed report and prepared to take it to the territorial capital. The night before he was set to leave, Fiona insisted on going with him. It is too dangerous, Blake protested. If Morrison realizes what we are doing while I am gone, you will be here alone. Then we go together. Blake, we are partners. Where you go, I go. He searched her face, then nodded slowly. Together then. Always. They left at dawn, telling their neighbors they were visiting family. The journey to Austin took several days of hard riding. Fiona had never traveled so far on horseback, and by the end of each day she was exhausted. But Blake was there to help her down from her horse, to massage her sore muscles, to hold her while she slept under the stars. In Austin, they presented their evidence to a territorial judge who listened with increasing interest. This is serious, he said finally. If even half of what you are saying is true, Morrison should be prosecuted. But I must warn you, men with his kind of power do not go down easy. Are you prepared for the consequences? We are, Fiona said firmly, reaching for Blake's hand. We just want to live our lives in peace. Is that too much to ask? The judge smiled slightly. No, madam, it is not. Give me a few weeks to investigate. In the meantime, I suggest you both watch your backs. They returned to Pecos to find that Morrison had not been idle in their absence. Their barn had been set on fire, though neighbors had managed to extinguish it before too much damage was done. Several cattle were missing, likely stolen. Blake's jaw tightened as he surveyed the damage, but he only said, "He is getting desperate. That means we are winning." 2 weeks later, territorial marshals arrived in Pecos and arrested Chet Morrison on multiple charges of harassment, illegal seizure of water rights, and attempted fraud. The trial that followed was the biggest thing to happen in Pecos in years. Blake and Fiona testified, along with a dozen other ranchers and farmers. Morrison's lawyers were good, but the evidence was overwhelming. In the end, Morrison was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison. His ranch was broken up and sold, the proceeds used to compensate his victims. Blake and Fiona used their share to improve both properties, finally able to invest in the equipment and stock they needed. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm. Spring turned to summer, summer to fall. Fiona discovered in October that she was pregnant, and Blake's reaction pure. Unrestrained joy made her cry happy tears. They spent the winter preparing for the baby, Blake building a beautiful cradle from wood he carefully selected and polished. Their son was born on a warm April morning in 1880, with Mrs. Henderson serving as midwife. Blake held the baby with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he counted tiny fingers and toes. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I cannot believe how lucky I am." They named him Samuel Thomas Calloway Samuel for Blake's father, Thomas for Fiona's first husband. Blake had insisted on honoring Thomas's memory, understanding that Fiona's past was part of what made her who she was. It was one of the many reasons she loved him so deeply. Samuel proved to be a healthy, happy baby with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determination. Fiona had worried that she might not be a good mother, that her grief over Thomas had somehow broken something essential in her. But motherhood came naturally, and she found joy in every milestone: Samuel's first smile, his first tooth, his first steps. Life was not always easy. There were droughts and hard winters, sick cattle and broken equipment. But Blake and Fiona faced every challenge together, their partnership strengthening with each passing year. On their 5th anniversary, Blake surprised her with the deed to a third parcel of land, expanding their ranch to nearly 1,000 acres. "When did you buy this?" Fiona asked, amazed. "I have been saving for 2 years. I wanted to give you something special, something that showed you how much these 5 years have meant to me." Blake pulled her close. "You saved my life, Fiona. Not in some dramatic way with guns and danger, but in all the quiet, important ways. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to build something that will last. I love you more today than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." Fiona kissed him deeply, pouring all her love into the contact. "I never thought I could be this happy. When I walked into that general store asking for ointment and gauze, I was just trying to survive. I never imagined I would find someone like you, someone who would heal wounds I did not even know I had." "We healed each other," Blake corrected. "You taught me that it was possible to love again, to trust again. You gave me everything I thought I had lost forever." 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Rose Catherine, whose arrival brought new joy to their growing family. Samuel adored his little sister, protective and gentle with her from the start. The house rang with laughter and love, a stark contrast to the lonely silence that had defined both Blake and Fiona's lives before they found each other. As the years passed, their ranch prospered. Blake gained a reputation as one of the most honest ranchers in West Texas, and Fiona became known for her skill with horses and her generosity to neighbors in need. They hired hands to help with the work, providing good wages and fair treatment that made people want to work for them. Samuel grew into a strong, capable young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Rose proved to have a talent for numbers and took over managing the ranch's accounts when she was barely 16. Blake and Fiona watched their children grow with pride, grateful for the family they had built together. On a warm evening in the summer of 1895, Blake and Fiona sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson. 17 years had passed since that day in the general store, and both of them bore the marks of those years' lines around their eyes, silver threading through their hair. But the love between them burned as bright as ever. "You ever think about that first day?" Fiona asked, her hand in Blake's. "When I stumbled into the general store bleeding and stubborn," Blake laughed. "I think about it all the time. I remember seeing you sitting there, trying so hard to be brave, and something in me just knew. I cannot explain it, but I knew that you were important, that helping you was the most important thing I would ever do. You saved my life. You saved mine right back." Blake lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "We have built a good life, have we not? The best life." Fiona leaned her head on his shoulder, contentment settling over her like a warm blanket. I love you, Blake Calloway. Thank you for being patient with me, for giving me time to heal, for loving me even when I was too scared to love you back. I would wait forever for you. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Inside the house, they could hear Samuel and Rose arguing good-naturedly about something, their voices full of warmth and laughter. The ranch stretched out around them, a testament to years of hard work and shared dreams. The sky was impossibly vast, painted in colors that still took Fiona's breath away after all these years. She had come to Texas broken and alone, asking a stranger for supplies to treat a simple wound. Instead, she had found a man who understood that some wounds go deeper than the skin, that healing requires more than ointment and gauze. Blake had given her time and patience and unconditional love, and in doing so, had healed wounds she did not even know existed. And she had done the same for him, filling the empty spaces in his heart with laughter and love and purpose. They had built something beautiful together, something that would last long after they were gone. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Blake pulled Fiona closer and kissed the top of her head. "What are you thinking about? How lucky I am. How grateful I am that you walked into that general store on the exact day I needed you most." Fiona tilted her face up to look at him, seeing her own happiness reflected in his eyes. "How much I am looking forward to spending the rest of my life with you." "The rest of our lives," Blake agreed, "and every day after that if heaven is kind." The years continued to pass, marked by both joy and sorrow as all lives are. They celebrated the marriages of both their children, welcoming new members into their family. Samuel married a school teacher from San Antonio, and they gave Blake and Fiona 3 grandchildren. Rose fell in love with a young lawyer and moved to Austin, though she visited often with her own growing family. Blake and Fiona grew old together, their bodies aging but their love remaining constant. They still rode out to check fences together, though at a slower pace. They still sat on the porch each evening, hands clasped, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. They still laughed at shared jokes and finished each other's sentences and fell asleep in each other's arms every night. When Blake passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78 in the year 1928, Fiona grieved deeply, but not hopelessly. She had loved 2 good men in her life. Thomas had taught her about loss, but Blake had taught her about healing, about building something beautiful from broken pieces. The pain of losing him was sharp, but it was tempered by gratitude for the 50 years they had shared. She lived for another 5 years, long enough to see her grandchildren grown and her great-grandchildren born. She filled her days with family and friends, with the ranch that she and Blake had built together, with memories of a love that had transformed her life. On the morning she died, surrounded by family in the house Blake had prepared for her so many decades before, Fiona's last thoughts were of that day in the general store. She could still see Blake's face as he crouched down before her, those blue eyes full of concern for a stranger. She could still feel the gentle touch of his hands as he tended her wound, the first of many times he would care for her with such tenderness. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure if she was speaking to Blake or to God or to the universe that had brought them together. "Thank you for everything." And then she closed her eyes and went to join her cowboy, the man who had proven that sometimes the deepest healing comes not from medicine but from love, and that asking for help when you need it most might lead you exactly where you were meant to be all along. Their story became legend in Pecos, told and retold by their descendants and neighbors. The story of the widow who asked for ointment and gauze, and the cowboy who healed wounds far beyond the surface. A love story born from pain and built on patience, proving that second chances are real and that true love can bloom even in the hardest soil, watered by kindness and tended with care. The ranch they built together still stands, passed down through generations of Calloways who carry on the legacy of honesty, hard work, and love that Blake and Fiona established. And on quiet evenings when the wind blows just right across the Texas plains, locals swear you can still hear laughter drifting from that old porch where two souls who were meant to find each other first learned what it means to truly be healed.